Good evening, everybody. My name is Faisa Karache, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to Hearing Stories, Narrative Audio in Isolation, co-organized by the Daniels faculty, the Sound Arts and Industries program at Northwestern University, and the Great Lakes Association for Sound Studies. So our host for this evening, Mitchell Akiyama, will introduce our speakers shortly. But first, I would like to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Daniels honors Indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, here and around the world, and we wish to pay respect to local elders, including those of the lands from which you are joining us virtually today. Now, back to our host, Mitchell Akiyama.
Thanks so much, Faisal. Hi, I'm Mitchell Akiyama. I'm an assistant professor at Daniels in the Visual Studies department, where I teach, amongst other things, sound art and creative writing and things. It's a really great pleasure to be with you tonight. So the spirit of this talk came together after I was conceiving of a sound art class, which was going to be the first sound art class taught in the ironically named Visual Studies department. And actually Faisal is one of the students in that class. And when I was thinking about what to do for this talk, I started thinking about how sound has become such an important part of everyday life. Millions of people listen to podcasts. And there's something about the intimacy of the medium that I thought was a really important and interesting thing to explore. So that's what we're going to do tonight. And I'm going to pass it over to Neil Verma, who's going to introduce himself. Neil?
Hi there. Thanks so much, Mitchell. It's a joy to be here and to represent Northwestern, the Sound Arts and Industries program, and to some extent GLASS, the Great Lakes Association for Sound Studies. Really thrilled to be part of this event and to hear from such inspirational and really accomplished sound creators here. So yeah, I think we're going to introduce the speakers first. And Mitchell, I think you're going to go first with Kaitlin, right?
Yeah. So I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce Kaitlin Prest. Kaitlin is a powerhouse in the podcasting world. She will probably own the whole thing at some point. So Kaitlin is a multiple award-winning artist from Third Coast, which is one of the important podcast festivals, Pre-Italia for new formats and movies, for her podcast Movies in Your Head. Yeah, she is the creator of the Heart, a podcast that aired on and airs on Radiotopia, one of the great podcasting outfits out there. And yeah, Kaitlin's work is just a really fascinating look at intimacy and relationships. Kaitlin is always recording everything. If you call and get her voicemail, it says something like, "You've reached Kaitlin. By leaving a message on my machine, you're consenting to letting me use this material in a future podcast." And so my introduction to Kaitlin was working, I was cast as an actor on a show that she did called The Shadows on CBC. And I had a lot of fun doing it, and Kaitlin and I became friends. And I always looked forward to her showing up at my house with a recorder in her hand at the door every morning when we got to work. So Kaitlin's going to go first, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say about her work. I'm going to pass it over to Neil again.
So I'm here to introduce Jana, and I'm going to kind of do an informal and then a more formal introduction of her and her work. It gives me great joy to introduce Jana Winderin, an artist whose work has become kind of something close to legendary in field recording and installation sound circles. Her records on touch really challenge us with kinds of material that almost no one's ever heard. Empty cloisters and ultrasonic bats, grunting cod, orcas, underwater insects, seal scaring devices, the sounds of coral, phytoplankton, Nordic shrimps, and meltwater. I only knew her stereo mixes of these recordings for many years, and then I got a chance to hear her work in 2018 when she performed here at Northwestern with Mike Harding. And it was just as memorable as the kind of harmonies and melodic shapes of the natural sounds. That's something that the Chicago Reader highlighted in their review, were the ways in which she could mix in a way. I think we only had 4 channels or something like that, but that created these incredibly surprising dynamics and intensities and swoops and waves that really encouraging listening with the whole body. That's something that she's actually written about recently. I just read an interview with her where she talked a little bit about kind of taking the focus away from the ears and towards listening, which is something I hope we'll hear a little bit more about. For those of you in the sound arts will know that the word immersive can seem a little bit too available in the field. While in theory, this term often suggests a form of listening that transforms thin air into thick aqueous environments, in practice, immersive audio also often just means expensive audio. But of course, while listening while immersed, it itself is actually not so easy. I myself can't hear a thing underwater. But Winderin's techniques can. Draw on training in marine biology as well as the arts, and from a lifelong proximity to the hydrosphere, from the lakes of her native Norway to the Thames in London, and now to recordings and locations from the Caribbean to the Barents Sea, Winderin has been a leader in the collection and exhibition of the aqueous environments of the Anthropocene. Delicate ticklish sounds of creatures munching on shells, thick beds of droning sea vessels, waking algae, and chatty bugs. In pushing the limits of what hydrophones can do, she, I think, shows us some really interesting ways of thinking of what Nina Eidsham calls intermaterial vibrational practices that are unique to individual spaces. In researching Winderin's work, I came across an interview that she did for the BBC in 2016, in which she described how humpback whales who come to give birth in the waters of the Dominican Republic seem to invent a new 40-minute song each year. So every year they come back to give birth and they invent a new song at this time. So in the interview, she's expressing her amazement at this practice, and she sort of stops at a certain point to ask why she should be amazed in the first place, considering the complex social bonds that we know whales have. So it's a question that says more about us than it says about whale behavior, something she observes in the interview. And this struck me as really important to her work because it's not really just whale song that's at the center of Winderin's practice, but also kind of the constraints, the perils and opportunities of anthropocentric perception itself. Winderin's sounds they also tell stories about moving up and down from warm to cold. In an article last summer, the New York Times wrote this about her, and I just love this quote. A gifted editor as well as a curious hunter of sounds, Winderin's unhurried compositions play out like John Carpenter's The Thing if it were directed by Andrei Tarkovsky. So it's going to take me a little while to unpack that. And while I unpack it, let me read the more formal introduction. Jana Winderin is an artist who currently lives and works in Norway. Her practice pays particular attention to audio environments and to creatures which are hard for humans to access, both physically and orally, deep underwater and inside ice, or in frequency ranges inaudible to the human ear. Her activities include site-specific and spatial audio installations and concerts, which have been exhibited and performed internationally in major institutions and public spaces. Recent work includes The Art of Listening Underwater for Audemars Piguet in Art Basel, Miami, Rising Tide at Kunstnernes. I'm going to make all kinds of mistakes when it comes to some of these pronunciations in Oslo. Listening with Carp for now as the time in Uzen. Through the Bones for Thailand Art Biennial in Krabi Bara for TBA 21 Academy. Spring Bloom in the Marginal Ice Zone, which is something that I think she shared in this call for Sonic Acts and Ultrafield for MoMA, New York. In 2011, she won the Golden Nika and Ars Electronica for digital music and sound art. She releases her audiovisual work on Touch. And I think at this point, we are turning it over to Kaitlin as our first speaker, right?
Hi. Okay. I'm going to try so hard to keep this to 10 minutes. I'm Kaitlin. Hi. I'm going to share my screen now. And sound. Okay. So I'm Kaitlin Prest, and I kind of, I'm about to just kind of go over my everything that I've made up until this point, but through the lens of audio in isolation. I have been making audio in isolation for my entire life. First it was out of necessity because I didn't have a studio. I didn't have enough money to pay for a studio. And I didn't have any kind of real job. And so, I mean, except for waitressing. And I was making this show called Audio Smut. That was my first show. And I was obsessed with it. And me and my team were kind of forced to make the show out of our bedrooms. So these are pictures of some of the bedrooms. This is me in my my closet. That was really the high point, is the Mermaid Palace closet. It's really hard to find a walk-in closet in Brooklyn for less than $800 a month rent. But I found this one, and so that's a picture of that. This is my collaborator, Mitra Kaboli, and I. We called it Audio Smut Studios, but really it was just us recording underneath a blanket. That was before the closet. And this is another bedroom, me and the team doing a late night, putting things together. What was interesting about having the bedroom studio recording set up, was that the content we were making was also about intimacy and love. And so it really lent itself. When you go over to someone's house, the bedroom is always the place that is the best to record, because there's usually lots of fabric and carpets and all of that. So yeah, my room has been my studio for a very long time, and I'm going to play you that project. Audio Smut later became The Heart, because public radio at the time was very squeamish about the word smut. So this is The Heart, formerly known as Audio Smut. And I'm gonna be playing a lot of stuff, just because this is about sound, and the sound tells it better than I tell it with my person. So this is The Heart.
From PRX's Radiotopia, welcome to The Heart.
Should we kiss one more time?
Yeah.
Just to see.
Yeah. Things you say in a whisper to someone close.
Hey, are you awake?
Things you do in the dark.
Today when I was touching myself while you were inside of me, it wasn't working for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Things you never knew you liked.
Even though it felt awkward, it felt so good.
All the things that you feel but don't know how to name. Don't know how to put into words.
Just like,
This is a show about those things.
We were just up till 5 or 6.
but I can't tell you how I really knew. Why? Because it's too... Okay.
I'm your host, Kaitlin Prest. And on this show, me and Mitra Kaboli.
Okay, that's enough of that. So that's The Heart. You can get a sense of the intimate soundscape of like being in bedrooms and close mic recording and all of that. So the next project that I did was one that Mitch mentioned, called The Shadows. And I got to level up a little bit. It was with the CBC, and it's a huge institution. But I decided to negotiate with them that I was not going to work in their offices, that I wasn't going to use their fancy studios. I was like, I have to make the show out of my apartment in my bedroom. And on The Shadows, it was a fiction show. And what I did with that was I used the techniques that I had developed making documentary about intimacy to make something fictional. And so that's when I hired Mitchell Akiyama. This is us. This is kind of a window into what a day of working was like.
Wait, go. Yeah. It's a good thing that I can count on myself because I'm made of fingers. 1, 2. I didn't go to school for very long. I think I can only count to 2.
2.
2. Come here, darling.
So anyway, we would just kind of I would show up at his house. We would make coffee. We'd go upstairs to the bedroom and philosophize about art and love and make out and pretend to be in a relationship. And then that pretend to be in a relationship, series of recordings became the basis of a fictional love story that I made. still in a tiny space in bedrooms. So the next thing I did was something very ambitious and kind of insane. I started a company. So I guess what I wanted to do was to give a chance, like to kind of continue to make work, but also support other artists to make work and kind of expand a little bit and create a platform where other people could make audio universes that sound like the inside of their own minds and not have the burden of being consistent or whatever, like the way that you have to be whenever you're making a show. And so this is the trailer for the company that I made when we launched. Oh, it's not, sound is not on.
Searching for the real self. Where is it?
Talk as fast as I can into the mic for a while until something sounds good. Talk as fast as I can into the mic for a while until something sounds good. A little rasp, a little breath, a false tenor carrying only a short distance from my mouth through the microphone because when I support my voice, it sounds too big.
This is not a fucking podcast. This revolution is a critique of power, a resistance to dominant cultural narratives, a lifelong learning and unlearning process.
خدای بزرگ 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 There's a freeway, and on that freeway there's a car, and in that car there's a person, and in that person there's a beating heart, and in that beating heart there's blood, and in that blood there are cells, and in those cells there's mitochondria, and in those... Hey Mooch.
Hey Sharon.
That was good. Do it again.
So that's Mermaid Palace, the company. That was isolating just because I was the boss and I don't like that job. So we did have like a studio and stuff, but I felt very alone. And then COVID hit and we were all, I was kind of relieved when it hit because I was like, I know how to make audio alone, like in my bedroom. And so one of the shows that we were putting out is called Appearances, and it's by Sharon Mashihi. She was the creator. And it's about her family. And in the beginning, she really wanted to hire actors. And as we were drafting the cuts and stuff, like she was performing, like she was doing kind of caricature performances of all of her, like her parents and her brother and all the people in the Jewish Iranian community in New York that is the setting of this show. And I loved it so much. I was just like, don't get actors. You're so funny. You're such a good actor. You're such a good performer. And everyone wanted her to get actors. And I just put my foot down and I was like, you can't. You have to do the voices yourself. And then when COVID hit, it was a blessing in disguise because if we had actors, it would have been a total disaster. And all Sharon really needed was herself alone in her room with her microphone. And I'm going to play you a little bit of that. 153. There we go.
Adequately loved. Okay, now look at each other. I am thinking about partnership and love and how both those things look at me, bride, manifest in my family.
Jamshid!
Because I am at my brother's wedding. I love you so hard.
Jamshid! I love you.
Well, the wedding hasn't technically started yet. We're at the before part.
Jamshid!
The guests are going to arrive any moment.
What is it, Vida?
And my parents, Jamshid, are about to get into a huge fight about my father's choice to hire
a very expensive band.
Gypsy King! Surprise!
Without consulting my mom.
Where did you get the money? I refinanced. You refinanced my house so that Gypsy King could play Bombolea 3 times in a row? Are you kidding me? Sorry, Vida, what do you want me to say? They are my favorite band. Jamshid, I don't understand why the night of my own son's wedding, I have to have all of this anxiety because of your actions. And I don't understand why the night of my son's wedding, I have to be stuck next to a party pooper like you. Party pooper? You poop all over my life! Okay, khafe, the people are coming.
And 1, 2, 3.
Hi! Let's get the whole family together. Where is Melanie?
Thank you.
Where is Melanie? Melanie, Baba, where are you? Melanie.
So that's appearances. And the last thing that I'm going to share is I have this philosophy that like as an artist, you're basically, your task is to kind of like use what you have at your disposal to do what you can, you know? And I think about a refrigerator full of like random, like leftover, like bits and pieces of crappy groceries and like figuring out what you can make out of what's in the fridge. And when COVID hit, I was alone with my family and my sister didn't have a job. And I needed a receptionist. And she works as a receptionist. And so I hired her to do administrative work. And after a little bit, I was like, oh my God, my sister is a classically trained jazz vocalist. Like, why am I not making art with this person? And so for the last few months, this leads us up to now. I've been working with my sister, making music. And this is a little piece of a performance that we made.
Oh, if I had wings, just like Noah's dove, I would fly. I would fly away. I would fly away to the one I love. I would fly away to the one I love. Oh, 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 if I had wings just like Noah's dove, I would.
Natalie, you're wrecking it. Natalie.
We are sisters.
Sisters.
Oh, if I had wings. Just like Noah's dove. I was made for loving you, baby. You were made for loving me. The only way of loving me, baby, is to pay a lovely fee. Oh, if I had wings, just like Noah's dove, I would fly away to the one I love. I would fly away to the one I love. Oh, if I had wings, just like Noah's dove,
just like Noah's dove,
I would fly away to the one I love.
To the one I love.
I would fly away to the one I love.
To the one I love.
Oh, if I had wings, just like Noah's dove.
Oh, if I had wings, just like Noah's dove.
To the one I love.
Fly away.
I would fly away to the one I love.
I would fly away
to
the
one I
one
had
I
wings,
love.
just like Noah's dove. Oh, if I had wings, just like Noah's dove, I would fly away to the one I love. Oh, if I had wings, just like Noah's dove.
Okay. That's it. The end. Thank you. Stop sharing. There we go.
Thanks, Kaitlin. And next up, we're going to hear from Jana.
Hello, I will share my screen. And thank you, Neil, for the introduction. It was very good. I felt at home with that one. So I won't say too much. Thank you for the invitation to be here. And yeah, I do remember Chicago actually. And yes, so I have, been listening since before I was born. I mean, it's not something we kind of just start doing. We do it all the time. And but I have particularly focused my work around very specialized listening the last 15 years with hydrophone recordings. And but even before that, in 92, I started recording sound, wandering around the Thames with a cassette player and recording. Though this image here is from Iceland some years ago. So I am occupied with all this, the small creatures, the small sounds, as also was mentioned. Here you can see this little spider, it's holding, it's fishing into its net. You can see that they're holding, feeling this thread. And I was trying to poke this net, and he wouldn't move. But when a fly came in, it was like right there and eating it, catching it. So, it's very was sensing the different vibrations. And this kind of, I walk around in my camera and I see these things. It's like, wow. And also I'm occupied with frequencies and, animals that are perceiving outside of what we perceive. And like bats is the most... that we know about. Generally, I knew about bats. I used to feed them in my garden in the farm where I grew up, throwing bits of bread up to them and they would dive down. This one is outside of Panama and it's actually fishing with sound down towards the surface. So it's echolocating to the surface, and I want to come and play it for you. It's slowed down 20 times. A range where we can actually perceive it. And I use a lot of equipment to record with, mainly my hydrophones that I will continue to talk about. I use ultrasound detectors to detect the bats and rats and other ultrasound frequencies. Though, that we call them ultrasound. It was funny when I'm out with my dog, Charlie. He's actually snoring in the background here. It's like middle of the night. So if you hear some snoring, it's him right behind me. And for him, it's like bats, he can hear them like as I hear the birds. So I'm interested in also this, how we are setting the kind of limit of what is perceivable. And I want to kind of just also point towards these creatures operating outside of our perception. Though this is like different types of hydrophones and my recorder. And I suggested some years ago that we can listen to the health of a river. I mean, I think it was back in 2009 or something like that. When I was working with a project following a river, and freshwater biologists, they use to count underwater insects to say something about the condition of a body of water. So I thought if you can identify the sound of the underwater insects, you can kind of say something about, because some of them survive and some of them will die out, so you can listen for the health of a river. There's a little bit of a choir of them here. And I moved this idea over to maybe it's possible to listen to coral reefs and also. So I'm working on with TBA 21 Academy. Since 4 years I was on their boat Dardanella, listening into coral reefs in the Caribbean to try to say something about the health or the state of these areas. With hydrophones, and let's play a sample. So you can hear all this kind of crackling that happens. It's like crustaceans, and there are the occasional fish, but here in the foreground you could hear the that was bottlenose dolphins chatting along. And up here I also record in the northern Arctic region. This is close to the North Pole, where I was working with spring bloom in the marginal ice zone that I mentioned to listen to before this. And I go to the places to get some kind of sense of what it feels like to be there. What is this sea ice? And it would not really make sense for me to collect sounds from the internet or from other people's recording, because for me, like, listening is just, it's one part of the whole thing, and you need to, the temperature, what it feels like. It's kind of, hard to move around, hard to breathe, people you meet and talk to and other people's experiences all kind of adds into the story. I wanted to figure out more about this, what is happening in this area where the Norwegian government, they go in really wanting to drill for more oil in this very fragile area on the, and it's the Northeast Passage is opening up with the less of ice there. And what will happen then when you have the increased shipping traffic, the increased level of sound, of human-made sound in this area. What I heard when I used my hydrophones here, you can hear the sounds of the bearded seal. Of course, this sound was a really surprise to me. I hadn't recorded seals yet at that point. And of course, it gives sort of additional information. I couldn't see them unless, but just when the sound stopped, and suddenly in front of me, it was out of the water was a big seal head. So I know that it was him making that sound, because it started again when it disappeared underwater. In this area, there's a very important carbon sink. You have the spring bloom around May, middle of May, and then the phytoplankton starts to bloom, and the zooplankton will eat the phytoplankton, and so it goes. And the fish, not this fish though, because this is an inland fish, it's a pike, and not those fish that are here. But these fish I recorded in Thailand, so I'm making a huge jump from the Arctic to the tropical waters, where I worked with the Thailand Biennale and with local fishing in a local fishing village in Krabi, particularly for this piece Through the Bones, where we were also listening with an oar to the head and using bone conduction to listen into the water. So everybody should do that. Try it next time you have the chance to put an oar to your head. If you don't have hydrophones, you can still listen underwater even without going into the water, because the wood would transmit the sound from water onto your skull. And you can also, of course, go into the water and listening with the whole body. And there's a technique called dulam, which is known in south of Thailand, as a way to listen with your body. And this is a school of fish in Thailand. So actually this technique of listening with an oar to the head is also known in the Arctic area for listening for whales. So I try to connect then the Arctic with the tropical, where the melting is happening, to where it's flooded through an oar to the head from the north to an oar to the head in the south. Spring Bloom in the Marginalized Zone was shown as part of Sonic Acts Festival. Just to show you some examples of installations quickly. I was used a few days to sit and work the sound into the environment. Here actually in Toronto in 2018 for Blackwood Gallery. I was not there actually, but there was this kind of temporary situation. So I wanted it to be very temporary, that kind of these lifts were carrying in the sound from the ocean, and you could experience it there. Or here, which was more kind of temporary listening space on Trafalgar Square, where I used the sounds from local bats in the ultrasound range. Also here in New York at MoMA, we had a 16-channel setup, and I work closely with Tony Mayat very often on my large sound installation, and also out recording. Also on this one in Dive, where we had about 80 speakers with 8 different underwater sound environments you can walk through. I was invited by New York Department of Transportation, so people could wander through these 8 different from shallow to deeper water underwater environments. These are totally different, very quiet. I wanted to show you this is kind of very variety to a very different location. We used solar power to run transducers inside these boats in a very quiet area. I had to be very quiet and delicate with my composition. And here in Chicago, the one that a concert I did when I was in the Renaissance Society there. And the last exhibition I did, the Art of Listening Underwater for Audemars Piguet, the Art Basel in Miami, where you could listen inside of this space. And it was open for all. Important for me that it was open and free, and not the kind of VVIP. It was a situation. So everybody could come in and spend as much time as they wanted. I'm now working on a piece called Listening Through the Dead Zones, about the Baltic Sea and the areas which have not enough oxygen, that are these growing areas where they have too much eutrophication, so you get too low oxygen levels. We're supposed to happen last year. It's moved to August this year, and I'm making a sound installation for this location, so people can come in. Because of COVID now, I couldn't do it, but we still do work online, and I'm interviewing people, that you can find different perspectives on the Baltic Sea situation. And I do local recordings. There was a few days ago, and we have some ice swimmers in the local lake here. I'm actually just north of Oslo, by the largest lake in Norway. So the local ice swimmers have made a hole, so it's perfect to do some recordings here for me some days ago. And this is one maybe some of you were listening to before, the Spring Bloom in the Marginalized Zone. I work closely with Touch, label in London and Los Angeles. And I do the occasion special editions on USB stick to be able to release things on 24-bit, but these are kind of very limited editions. And here you can listen to my work on Bandcamp. Also some of the installations I have published there. And follow the website and see when the different things are happening. Thank you. Rushing through over here.
Thanks so much, Jana. So now Neil and I are going to have a conversation with Ianna and Kaitlin. Please feel free to post questions in the Q&A function of Zoom. So I think the four of us will talk until maybe about 7:40 or so, and then we'll get to some of the questions from the public. So Neil, why don't you start us off?
Sure. Thanks to both of you. These have been such wonderful presentations and great introductions to your work. We feel very lucky to have both of you and to have both of you at this great moment in your careers. But I kind of wanted to kind of back up a little bit and talk about sort of something that's a bit of a cliche, I suppose, in talking about the sound arts, which is this thing about intimacy and intimate experience. And if I could put a bit of a twist on that, we kind of want to know what its role is in your work, but if I could put a bit of a twist on it, intimacy and isolation often have a lot of similarities to one another, right? That they're both about kind of proximity to things, and sometimes they're pleasant and sometimes they're not. I'm thinking a little bit of what you were saying, Kaitlin, about using what's in your fridge, that kind of isolation that becomes intimacy. And Jana, I'm thinking a little bit about your work and about how in many ways you take things that are very far from us in terms of our ability to experience them and bring them closer. But also the fact that you're recording these ice swimmers, which I want to hear more about. Are they actually swimming underneath there? But if I could just raise this question of intimacy and intimate experience, especially in relation to the experience of isolation that we're all kind of having right now. If you could say a little bit about the role of those things in your work, that would be great.
Who wants to go first? Think out loud, so I'll just go first. I guess what you said, Neil, what it makes me think of is that intimacy for me involves a certain amount of shutting out the world. As you were saying, it's kind of like intimacy and isolation are together in a way. They're connected. And yeah, I guess, how does that relate to my work? It's like going deep. I guess that kind of relates to Jana's work as well, like going really deep with a limited number of variables, So right now my variable is my sister. I'm like, how many different things can we make? It's kind of like that idea that restriction breeds innovation, where, or like the shadows, like it was sort of centered around the relationship between the Charlie character and the Kaitlin character. And the entire process was sort of centered around the 80 hours of recordings that Mitch and I did over the course of the summer that year. And sort of blocking off the exits, I think, is a big part of how that relates to my work, and sort of making sure, just drilling down deep and going as far as you can. And also, I guess I would say, intimacy in terms of who you choose to work with. I think a lot of the work that I do wouldn't be possible if I didn't work with people that I feel close to. And that relates to the isolation of COVID as well, because the only reason why I'm able to make art with my sister is because we got COVID together and we're in a bubble, Yeah, that's what I have. Passing the mic.
Yeah. It made me kind of think about concentration, really, because it's, of course, when I'm out recording, it's a very kind of concentrated fog. I need to be really focused. Need to be really in that side of that space when I'm listening, and this can, it probably is a very kind of isolated occupation. I probably, I need to be on my own or with other people, also listening, you know, sitting out there for 5 to 6 hours just listening, you know. And very quickly it becomes like boring if you have people there for other people, and it get distracted that people would be you know, bored or hungry or cold or something like this. You know, that was just like this kind of listening process. But yeah, yeah, intimate. I think about listening as the whole presence of the body, you know, through the body very much, you know, not just like some kind of, you can't really separate listening out from everything else, like I was mentioning before. And being, like you said now, with the, you know, innovation, you find out what to do in the situation. And here, you know, outside my studio or inside the studio, just opening the windows, or, you know, you just you find things to work with. This is not really a problem. I mean, so it's not really a problem. I can't, you know, can't travel. You know, there is loads of stuff happening right outside or inside, for that case, you know. And was, you know, it's just really paying a lot of attention. There's a couple of this really, you know, birds. Suddenly I started to kind of really notice the small, and now I'm actually looking forward to them kind of starting up and being more loud again. And, you know, yeah. There's always something, and then, yeah.
I saw a video not long ago that Chris Watson posted, where he posted this hypothesis that because there's less plane noise and car noise out there, that the bird calls of birds are carrying further than they normally do, and so this might mean that different birds would mate with further off birds, and so the gene pool of the birds would change as a result of it changing the way they listen and hear.
No, absolutely. And you know, something I also noticed, you know, the space opens up a lot, because, you know, when the cars and the human sound, which are kind of, you know, a lot of the frequencies at the same time, they will close the space in. You hear much further distance when they are not masked by us so much, you know. And that's pretty, you know, to really sense that. And I think a lot of people are sensing that, actually. They can hear more distance, yeah.
I was thinking, oh, sorry. I wanted to add, I just had a new connection form, like after, I feel like sometimes for me, there's like an intimacy overload that requires isolation, you know, like afterwards. like I think the kind of work that I've done, it involves being really intimate with people, sometimes really quickly, really immediately, and really deeply for like intense, concentrated periods of time. And over the years, I feel like I've isolated myself more and more from social interactions, because like I remember when I left, I used to live in a big hippie house where the closet was with 5 people. And I lived there for, I think, 6 years. And when I left, I knew that I had to live alone, because like my job is intimacy. And I was like, I have to like really limit my intimate relationships, because yeah, like and getting older too. I think when I was 22, I was like, intimacy, yes, everything, all the time. And now I'm like, I'm tired. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to open up on that intimacy question a little bit more, because I find it, I don't know why this hadn't occurred to me, but it sort of started to form as a thought when Kaitlin was talking about only recording in bedrooms. And I was thinking that Kaitlin only records in bedrooms and Jana only records outside in these not necessarily remote, but these, she works in the field. And so the microphone for both of you, this is a question that Neil and I come up with, that you both use the microphone as an instrument, but the way that you place the microphone is really, for both of you, it's quite unconventional. So like in Kaitlin's work, the microphone explores these private moments that we rarely get to hear. We hear them in our own lives, but not in other people's lives. And so she sort of turns the room inside out into this space that invites you into the intimacy that is possible because of that closed off, cloistered kind of world. And in Jana's work, the microphone is like a tool for exploration, and the microphone goes into places and captures things that we can't really hear with our unmediated senses. So yeah, I would love to hear from you both about your thinking about how the microphone either in one sense, I guess, is a tool for exploring intimacy, but also how do you think of the microphone as your instrument or as your main kind of tool for gathering material?
Okay. Yes, how I think about it. You know, you do in the placement of the microphone. I often use have a 8 to 12 channels that I would record with different types of microphones, and hydrophones. I often have 4 different hydrophones at different depths, but also recording in air with a sound field microphone, and also maybe sometimes with an ultrasound detector at the same time. It's just a kind of, yeah, but it doesn't need to be like that. I mean, it depends on the situation, what I would like to do. But of course, it's already the decision making and the composition, so to say, is starting already out in the field, and it is a concentrated process of where to put it, and there's but first of all you need to listen, and I listen a lot, and then you move things around accordingly, and then record. There's no point in kind of just recording, not the way I work to record everything, but there's different ways of working. Other people might want to just, leave the microphone and leave the recording device out there and come back and be very excited about what they have caught there or inside or whatever. So it's just different ways of working. I think because I've specialized so much, and it's become really important to have a quiet preamp and all these things, but this has gone over years, and I never think that people should really start off with equipment. You need to start off with the project, what you're interested in doing, and follow that, and not just, so it's a kind of process that's gone over years. I think what kind of equipment I use and my relationship to the different types of ways of picking the sounds or remembering it on the, yeah.
What's your favorite one to use?
My favorite, that's my favorite type of microphone, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Depends on the situation. It's just hard to say any kind of favorites, but they tend to kind of, yeah, it changes also, so it's hard to say there is one. I mean, things are changing, so yeah, depends. I have a very sensitive hydrophone now because of the underwater insects originally, but then I now have 3 of the same ones because I want to move on to place them in a triangle, so it keeps then I build things to make them float off away from the boat. You have different techniques and different things that develops all the time, so that's why I have to say favorite. And what about you?
My favorite, what I swear by is the shittiest microphone of all time. It's it costs $100. It's a Zoom H1. And I love it because it's so mobile, I can bring it into the bedroom or just bring it into intimate spaces where people it's just no wires. I hate the wires. And so no wires, and so quick to just take it out and record, and it's in stereo. So, and it works. It sounds great, and anyway, so that's my favorite one. But I read the question. I guess my first thought about the question was that in some ways the microphone is my enemy, because with intimate spaces, you know, I think it was a real revelation to me early on with sound design that, you know, the sound of something doesn't conjure the feeling of something. And like as a narrative artist, you're like, I'm trying to crystallize what it feels like to be kissed. And what it sounds like to be kissed is disgusting, you know, it just sounds gross. And the sound of people having sex is kind of gross too. It's just like smacking noises, you know, and like, yeah, that learning curve was kind of an interesting moment for me in learning sound. But then on the other hand, like I also remembered times when I have the headphones on and I'm listening to everything through the microphone in an intimate space. Like I'm remembering like a day that I was like in bed with someone and we were just talking and everything, it just like heightens the senses, you know, kind of like what you were saying about like, it's not, I don't know what listening with the whole body is. I love the idea of it and I can't wait to try. But I do find that when they're on, like it heightens all the sensations, you know, like I did an installation a few years ago called Bath, where I would get like people to come into an empty apartment and take a bath. And it was like a sound walk, but into an intimate space. So it was a sound walk that guided you into the bathroom alone. And you would hear my voice in your ear guiding you. But I also mic'd the room so that the participant could hear themselves in the space. And like, I kind of directed them to kind of like touch their skin and like, and to listen to the sound of their hand touching their skin and to allow the volume that they could hear amplify the sensation on their body, you know, like by hearing it you feel it in a deeper way somehow. And like you notice everything, I guess. And maybe that's kind of the world that you're in, Jana. Like it's like you notice, I guess I remember studying deafness when I was younger, and like the cochlear implant and the difference between a cochlear implant and like the way that we hear with our organic ear. And that with the cochlear implant, you know, you hear everything. And that was before I was recording, but now I understand. It's like, oh, like you're not picking and choosing what you're hearing. It's a whole, the whole thing. I don't know. So those are the off the top of my head thoughts about that, about the microphone as instrument. Yeah.
I think we want to probably, I wonder if I could combine a couple of questions we talked about just so we can kind of make sure that we have plenty of room to talk to pose the questions from the audience. And the two I have in mind have to do kind of with process, which I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this will want to know more about. So when Mitchell and I were talking about this, we thought, you know, one commonality that you both have that might not be apparent to people who are just getting interested in your work is that you both like bring a lot to the process when you start out. I know that Jana's worked with, knows a lot about fisheries and works a lot with scientists. And Kaitlin, I know we've talked before about how you spend a lot of time interviewing people and like reading before you even come up with a concept for something you're going to do. And so there's this kind of depth of research that I'd like to know a little bit about in terms of how you start. And then on the other end, we're both also curious, and I'm sure the audience is curious about how you structure your works, because both of you end up often with a lot of tape, and you know, have, especially Jana, you have different kind of material circumstances where you're going to be you know, putting it out there. So if you could maybe talk about those two things, kind of like how you get started on a project, the role of research in that, and then maybe how you think about structuring your works.
Okay. Shall I start on that? Or yeah. Okay.
I could, or you could.
Okay, I'll go. No, in terms of, you know, how projects are developing, it's just, I mean, I would say I'd rather, you know, build on, and you read and follow tracks. Like you know, there might be something interesting that I come across while I'm working with one project that leads me on to the next one, you know. So this is like so super exciting, you know, that period when you just they're just not coming out of nowhere, you know. It comes from something you've been working on before, you know, and it attracts you to go one direction, and I follow that, and then, you know, read more, go out, experience more, talk to people, call people, you know, whatever. And also just, you know, there is a lot of that seemingly coincidences that happens, I feel like. And, you know, when I went to the North Pole, for example, it was just after I had started to think very much about this, you know, sea ice, and I got invited to go to the North Pole. And, you know, it's like, and then of course I've clear time to, I go there, you know, definitely. And, you know, so it's just choices you make. And I think in terms of the process of the sounds, you know, when, you know, this the logging, of course, is really important. I always photograph and record at the same time, so I would log both photographs and sounds, and write notes in little books, as important as they are, like the hard drives, are the little books that I write in, and my notes to myself. And then I start to think about what, you know, if there's an outcome, like a release would be a very different way of working from a beginning and an end to this, which I showed, the dive, for example, the sort of quite massive sound installation in the tunnel there in New York. A very different way of thinking. I think like looped situation that would, you know, would fit together somehow. So I set up kind of idea about that in my studio, how it can, you know, how that works, and then working with this, often with this kind of 3 layers of this sort of larger ongoing bed things are lying on, and then you go kind of into these 3 different stages of closer and closer. I often think that way, and I often think of stories like from cold to warm, or, you know, one for energy field, for example, that release, I was thinking like from land and then jumping into the water and going into the ice, you know, and then going up for air now and then, you know. I would sort of think myself in this situation when it had this kind of beginning and end situation. It totally depends on what the outcome is, and it's very, very different for each of them, you know. Like a radio commission or something like that would be a very different thing when I don't have any control over how people are listening to it, you know. I would try it out on different speakers, or a little bit see that it works, you know, even down to kind of computer speakers. While sound installation, I would ask for, you know, that they are rented locally, speakers similar to the ones I have in the studio, for example. And it totally depends. It's very different processes in that sense.
For me, I guess like a big way that I decide what to work. I mean, I talk to people a lot about my ideas. Like on the Heart, we really had like kind of an organized structure of how we figured out ideas. And I really think that when we were making the Heart, we were on a really rigorous schedule. Like we had to do 24 episodes a year. It was madness. But that rigorous schedule kind of forces you not to overthink, you know, like it forces you to trust your instincts because there's no time to do anything else, you know. And so with the Heart, the way we would do it, and Audio Smut as well, we would have these kind of like theme documents where and it was nice as well, like that idea of the like restriction breeds innovation. Like we had a frame that we were working within. The frame was intimacy, love, sexuality, queer, feminist, you know? And so that kind of closed off a lot of possibilities and like allowed us to kind of, you know, like there's like hundreds of things that you could make on those topics. And so we'd create these theme documents, and then we called them pitch parties, and we would like invite a bunch of our friends over and talk through the different ideas we had and see how those ideas resonated with the group. Like if people were like, ooh, I have a story about that idea, you know, like the Movies in Your Head project. You know, I was like, oh, like, have you ever had this thing where you like, you know, only went on 2 dates, but you're planning your like children's names or whatever, and and everyone in the room is like, oh my God, yes, absolutely, holy shit. And then you're like, oh, I've got something, you know, like I've got something that's tapping into something that hasn't been articulate, like doesn't have a name yet, but that people feel. And then once the pitch meetings would be done, then I just shop it at parties, you know, like I would just like at parties be like, so this thing, like, what do you think? Like when I was doing the consent, I did a consent series that really took off right before Me Too. And I would just talk to people like, so like, you know, have you ever had like a sexual encounter that like you didn't really want, but you kind of like on paper consented to, but like you left feeling horrible? And like every woman I talked to was like, oh my God, yes, 100, you know? And so like I would kind of crowdsource a little bit like interest, or crowdsource like absolute like glazing over of the face. And yeah, and then that would kind of get me committed to an idea. And then I would make sure to put it in the schedule, and that would force me to actually make it. And when it comes to like the pre-production process, like even right now, for example, like I've been incubating an idea for like a really controversial show that may end up being the last thing I ever make if I decide to make it. And I'm you know, like I'm just like whenever I'm talking about something controversial, I always make sure to interview like 50 people to be like I look within first. I'm like, I have this thing that I've been experiencing. And then I'm like, I wonder if it's just me. And then I start asking people like, is it just me, or have you experienced something like this? And when enough people say, yes, I've experienced something like this, then I go for it. And then when it comes to structure, it does like Jana was saying, like it's like depends on the project, like, but usually it's like yeah, tough to say. I mean, like it's easy to talk about the shadows, like that's a specific project, it was fiction. And I guess all of my fiction projects kind of operate around this. It's like writing a lot and then going out and like generating a lot of audio material, and then going through the audio material and picking out only the things that resonate, that elicit an emotional reaction for whatever reason, even if it doesn't fit into the idea of the story that you were going to make. And then you pull out all those emotional moments and listen to them and figure out what the story is from there. And sometimes, I mean, like with the shadows, for example, you just follow, you know, like there was this one section where I just pulled up all my, like a bunch of stuff from my personal archives of like moments that I had lived, and like, you know, made like a montage that sounded cool with cool music just because I liked the way that it sounded. And there was no narrative reason for it, but everyone loved it. Like I always workshop things, like I play things for people and then they're like, oh my God, that part, I don't know what's happening there, but I love it. And then I'm like, cool, I have to keep that. And so I keep that and I work things around it. Yeah, it's a very like kind of collaborative like process of like trying things, thinking they're stupid, sharing them with the group liking certain things, and then keeping those things and then building again. And it's like also very iterative. Like everything that I've ever made is like 50 versions, you know, which is maybe a little much. I could try out like 20 versions. Maybe I should try sometime 20 instead of like the perfectionism monster is sometimes I think not helpful. But yeah, those are my answers.
I have lots more questions, but I want to make sure that we leave some time for questions from the audience. So I'm going to turn it over to Faisal actually to go through the Q&A and put some questions to the two of you.
Okay, perfect. So the first question is from Will. Jana, have you run into or recorded the issues of noise pollution caused by sonar or other sources?
Well, as a human created sound being, often, very often you can consider that as noise pollution, because we often don't know even that how much sound we're putting under the water. So this is happening all the time, and everywhere I've been, there is nowhere I've been where there hasn't been human created sound underwater. And this also mean even like, I remember out in the coral reef in Belize, and there was not so much boats around because they're so shallow there, but there was like this small plane overhead every 10 minutes. So, you know, you just, and even on the North Pole, there was like loads of people cheering and laughing, you know, at the actual pole point. And so there is really not anywhere where it's hard to avoid, basically. So yes.
Okay, so we have another question by Adrian. So, hi, I wanted to say thank you to all the panelists and the host. This is the panel of my dreams, a strange overlapping of interpersonal intimacy and acoustic ecology. So, question for Kaitlin. The heart is why I started making audio art in 2014, and I am now an independent audiovisual artist in Chicago. Even now, when I'm working on a piece, I think, what would Kaitlin do? I'm curious about your process and how quickly or slowly you move, and if you have reflections on making something long or short, and how to know when a piece is done.
Ooh. I mean, I guess long or short, like, I guess a lot of my big projects have like a 3-year lifespan. Like the shadows, for example, like I invented the shadows in my head, like as soon as I had made Movies in Your Head, which was my first fiction piece. I made that in 2014, and then the shadows got made in 2017. And with No is the consent project I was talking about. Like I had the idea for it. Yeah, like it's usually like the big ones are usually a 3-year lifespan, like where I have the idea, I start kind of digging around, like I was talking about before. Maybe I'll start doing interviews, maybe I'll write a proposal, and then other things get in the way. And then a moment comes where the space for the project is there. And like, so I guess it's like slow, and then super fast, you know, even appearances, which you heard. I mean, Sharon and I thought of the idea for that show when we were making the shadows, like right at the beginning. I cut this deal with her. She didn't want to be an editor anymore because it's like really annoying. You like basically architect something and then someone else gets all the credit. It's like painful. And so she was like, I'm not going to be your editor. I can't be an editor anymore. And I was like, but I need you. And I said, I'll pay you and I'll trade you hour for hour, helping you make your own show. So every hour you work on the shadows, I'll help you make something. And we thought of appearances. And that was, that was like early 2017, and appearances came out in 2020. So yeah, slow, like incubating and like, you know, and then you have to put the deadline, at least that's for me, like you have to put the deadline. Like if you don't put the deadline, I will just never do it. I'll lose faith in it. And so once the deadline is on the calendar, like then it's really, really fast, and fast to the point of like probably being like harmful to my mental health, you know, like on the shadows, I was doing like 16-hour days for 8 months, you know, like some actual 24-hour days were in there, you know, and I didn't take a break because anyway, so I don't advise that. But I'll also, I mean, Reef fast, like playing tricks on yourself, being like, the deadline is tomorrow. What can I do in that time? You know, the deadline is, like, I always trick myself as well by doing listening parties, like where I'll invite like 10 people to do a listening party, but I actually have no idea what I'm going to make. But like the fear of having to present something forces me to make something. And it's interesting to kind of play with time, I think, you know, like play with what could I make in a day? What could I make in a week? What if I give myself 1 month to make something, what will I make, you know? And I also will say that something that's really important to my process is like a stew, like you kind of have to let things settle, you know, like you cut all the stuff up, you put it in, you know, like, but like if you like, you kind of have to like let it sit for a while, and then come back to it. I think that part of the process is really important. because I just think it is. Everything that I've ever made really benefited from that. And then what was the other part of the question? Oh, short or long? I don't know. I don't know what to say. I feel like short is sometimes harder than long. For me, it's like, should something be an episode or a series? That's a question. And like, it's like, do you have an endless amount of ideas for how, for how to represent a certain topic or a certain story? If you have an endless amount of ideas, then that's a series. And if you find yourself kind of stalling, like if you're plotting it out and you're like, you get to episode 3 and you have nothing, that's probably an episode, And I guess I like things that are short, like I like things that are 12 minutes. Like I'm my first art wife, Mitra Gaboli, her boredom meter is like so sensitive. And so I really learned how to make things tight and like shave off all the, extra. And I like that because I think it's kind of, it's respectful to the audience, but I also think that things that are like really long and luxurious and like meandering are good if you set the audience's expectations at the beginning and kind of like slow them down. That's it. That's it.
Good answer.
Yeah.
So this one's for both Jan and Kaitlin. I want to actually know this. What are you listening to right now on heavy rotation or shuffle?
Yeah, well, it keeps changing. I mean, right now, right before this, I was listening to Philip Jack, actually, because it's always good. I love to listen to Philip Jack. So if that was you meant particular artists, but it's very many different ones.
I've been listening to the radio, like just classic, like that's all I listen to. I love going back to Canada because the music stations here are just incredible. I have the jazz station, I have the classical station, and I have the university radio station. And I flip back and forth between those 3. And it's just so sad. I had to actually like go on the internet to buy a radio. I went to like 10 different stores and not one of them had a radio. But yeah, I love that. I love like and I love on Valentine's Day, I listened to the radio all day all by myself in my apartment. And it was so lovely. Like, it was just like, I was like, somebody's in a studio talking to me right now. It's so great. So yeah.
So this one's from Valeria. Dear all, thank you so much for such insightful presentations. I'm keen in understanding the act of recording and archiving in relation to sound, as the ephemerality and temporality of sound's existence is linked to the experience of it as much as constituting the intimacy of such experience. How do you approach the process of archiving of listening process, and what do you think is gained or lost in reenacting those processes? I'm also in the level of intimacy and connection with those sounds.
Should I go?
Yeah, you go.
Okay, I'm going. I'm going.
I'm
going. Okay. I guess I'm like a really like voracious archivist. I'm a very irresponsible and messy person, but my archives are like the one area of my life that are like perfectly, meticulously, like compulsively organized. And I have like, I basically have a record of almost everything that's ever happened to me since the day I got my own recorder. And how do I do it? I mean, like, I just, yeah, I guess I like Mitchell said, I record everything. And then usually when I'm on an airplane or like going on a train or going on a trip or going home for Christmas, those are the days that I go through all of it, and I just like listen and label each thing, and keep it on a hard drive. I have that is not backed up. It's very bad practice. But how does that, like, I mean, it's interesting to think about the ephemerality of sound in relation to like keeping an archive. In all honesty, I think that that's a very interesting question, because in a way, like psychologically, I think it has had an impact on me that I have so much of my life, like there's a very big difference between the recording of an event and the experience of an event. And a recording is very different than a photograph. In a way, a photograph conjures the experience of the event in your memory. But when you listen to the recording of an event, it often shows you a truth that is not the truth that you remember. And it can be a little disorienting and uncomfortable. And like, you know, going back and listening to old versions of yourself or things that you said, or like just having your entire life documented in that way, it causes me to kind of like feel trapped in a way in the narrative of myself, as opposed to the ephemerality of life, you know, like being the person that I am today and having that be who I really am. Instead, I feel like I'm constantly walking with this collection of selves that I've been, and inhabiting all of them at once, and feeling like trapped in old versions of myself because I have these documents, you know, and also because I'm a memoirist and those documents are out in the world, and that's the version of me that people understand me to be. So that's what I have to say about that. Thank you for asking that question. It made me think about things that I had never really thought about. Yeah.
God, it's really interesting though. I think that what you said about it having these kind of different versions of yourself recorded, just reminded me I was going to have a recording of myself and I was speaking a totally different dialect because I was like born in the north. I was speaking this northern dialect, and then you have all this, you know, many years with yourself recorded. Of course, I get brought right back to the place, you know, and I play back something I recorded some long time ago, but it's just still really right there, you know, whatever fish or you know it is, I would be right back there. And well, I do put everything on. I have several hard drives, so I happen to have them all in one place, which is a bit stupid. But yeah, loads of notes in books and little drawings and whatever notes that are related to each place and every minute of the recordings, because there's no way around listening to everything, because you might miss something there, you know. So when you log it, you just have to log everything. Yeah.
Oh, so this one's another question to you, Jana. Regarding your releases on Bandcamp, does the content consist of strictly field recordings, or do you also add music? Just curious, because it seems like I heard some chordal drones in some of your work. And this is from Gregory.
Yeah, I am not really trying to kind of recreate sounds that are out there. So, you know, I'm not trying to kind of bring the field recordings into another space or into some kind of other form. I would rather bring people out with me to listen together, you know, than I would try to kind of recreate this whatever field recording or you call it in another space, because that is somewhere else, is another situation. So it's making a new situation, whether this be on a release or it be in a space that will be relating to that new space, and I will spend time there working with the space. And that's what I'm saying. It's like I don't at all, like, everything is based on the recordings I do, that I can say. But of course there's loads of processing going on in some of it, and what I try to make as like clear as possible and audible, best for people to listen to, the fish voices or, you know, the crustaceans, the sound of the underwater creatures. I really would like people to hear very clearly. But of course, there is loads and loads and loads of layers. You might not hear that all the time, but there's like Kaitlin was saying, you know, this stewing of things and the process of how long it takes to kind of, it is many versions of things. There's many layers and many sounds. So it might sound like it's a straight recording from somewhere, but it's not. Not so often. Only when I do talks, I will play, like I did now earlier today. I was playing recordings as they were recorded, as separate, in a more documentary way, I would say. Often my installations are more fictional than for that particular place or situation.
Well, we're almost out of time. We're all going to evaporate and not exist anymore in 5 minutes, or maybe we will still remain. I want to thank you all for coming, for being here with us tonight. Big thank you to Kaitlin and Jana, and thank you to Neil for helping me organize this, and thank you to Faisal for being our MC, and thank you, big thank you to Tim and Mimi and Aiden who helped plan and do all the tech for tonight. So yeah, I hope you'll come back to some other talks in our speaker series. There's a list of them on the Daniels faculty website. The next event is the 2021 lecture series. In our 2021 lecture series is Black Landscapes Matter with Walter Hood, who is the 2021 Michael Huff Ontario Association of Landscape Architects Visiting Critic, and that's on March 9th at 6:30. And then the next event in the Daniels Talk series is Unsettled Lands, Architecture, History, Pedagogy, and that's on March 11th at 6:30. So once again, thank you so much for being here tonight, and I hope you have a good listening after this. Go listen to some sounds. Okay, thank you.